Hello everybody, welcome to another South Pacific review. It has come to my attention that I didn't have a video release on my birthday last year, but luckily this video released on my birthday 15 years ago, so this will be the one for 2024. This episode, Castaways, centers on the interesting animals and cultures of the South Pacific, and how they travelled eastward across the Pacific from New Guinea. The first segment shows an aerial shot of an island, which zooms out before cutting to a view of Earth, which travels west towards New Guinea. In New Guinea, we see the first ever footage recorded of Goldie's bird of paradise, Paradisea decora, with a pair of males performing a mating dance on a tree branch, dancing and singing to impress a female. Before we see a footage of a long-nosed echidna, genus Zaglossus, feeding on ants, also in New Guinea, as well as brief footage of a tree kangaroo and a mourning gecko. More on these later. The next segment is once again in New Zealand, and follows a group of Papuans, the Chambri, who revere the saltwater crocodile, Crocodilus porosus. And in fact, the young men of this group go through a ritual in which they are given scars that appear like the scales of the crocodile. The entire ritual is not shown, as the scarring process is a closely guarded secret of the tribe. I do have some problems with the way this ritual is described by the script and narration, with the scarring being described as mutilation, highlighting some of the problems with the treating of indigenous people of the Pacific as primitive, which I will talk about again in the few other times when it occurs in the series. We then see the saltwater crocodiles, or salties, heading eastward towards the Solomon Islands, a chain of around 1,000 small islands. Then we see the men of the Solomons paddling tamako, or war canoes. The narrator explains that the Solomons have around 60% of the biodiversity of New Guinea. This is demonstrated by the next segment, where we see a reef in the Solomons, some of the most biodiverse in the world. We see how the shallow water reef fish get across the entire ocean, starting with the spawning of groupers, genus Epinephelus, and grey reef sharks Carcharodonus and Blurynchos hunting the spawning groupers. And we see the larvae of these reef fish, as well as some other larvae, e.g. robber crabs and plankton. The larvae use smell and sound to navigate between reefs. The next segment returns to the Solomons, and we see giant freshwater eels, Anguilla australis, which are widespread throughout the Pacific, including Australia and New Zealand, due to their spawning in sea and allowing this to transport their larvae. In many villages in the Solomons, the locals will feed the eels scraps in order to keep them around, so that they stay and keep the water sources and swimming holes clean, leading to these eels being very tame. Next, we travel eastward more to Fiji, or Viti, an archipelago of around 300 islands, which has much less animal biota than the Solomons, and has much stranger wildlife, with almost no mammals other than 6 species of bats, and less than 20 native bird species. Some of these strange animals include giant, around 13 centimeter long, millipedes, Gonibregmatus plurimipes, which are, despite their name, actually a type of centipede that has evolved to look like a millipede, as well as frogs, Platymantis vitiensis, which does not seem unusual until you take into account the fact that mere contact with salt water is incredibly toxic to frogs. So it's believed that these frogs, whose tadpoles do not need fresh water as they mature inside the eggs, arrived on rafts, similarly to the Fijian crested iguana, Brachylophus vitiensis, the largest living reptile in the archipelago. We then see a vegetation raft which has an iguana, some frog eggs, and a millipede on it, presumably placed there by the crew. The narrator then tells about the human inhabitation of the South Pacific, with footage of the ruins of Nan Madol, an ancient city on Pompeii, one of the very few archaeological traces of Polynesian society. He then tells of the unknown origin of the Hawaiian peoples, an idea linked with that of Hawaiki, the mythological homeland of the Polynesian people, and recent genetic and linguistic studies have traced their origins to Taiwan and Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, at one point the narration refers to indigenous Americans by the outdated term of Indians. Then we see Solomon Islanders take a traditional outrigger canoe out to sea. We continue west to the incredibly remote islands of French Polynesia, which have no bats nor amphibians, and only a very few lizards, with most of the animal biota being made up of seabirds, including sooty terns, Onychoprion fuscatus, which nest there and carry seeds which catch in their feathers and travel across the ocean, and are fertilized by the feces of the seabirds. The next segment talks about the ultimate ocean traveling plant, the coconut, which, due to the almost impenetrable shell of its seed, travels across the ocean and grows on any island it reaches. But even the coconut could not reach the most isolated archipelago in the world, Hawaii. Yes, we're going to Hawaii again. And the narrator gives us the fact that in the 30 million years before it was settled by humans, under 500 species arrived there again. This time, we see not the flies, but the spiders, who similarly evolved from only around 13 species into over 100, including the happy face spider, Theridion graulata, and we also see the honey creepers, whose 50 species, most of which are unfortunately extinct, evolved from only a few individuals of the genus Carapodacus. Their ancestors, finches, are not very good flyers, found they in Hawaii. Yet the most likely hypothesis is, once again, cyclones, and in fact some spiders use their webs to fly across the world on similar wind. Next we see volcanic plains on Hawaii, and amongst them the mourning gecko, Lepidodactylus lugubris. These are the ultimate Pacific colonizers, due to their almost complete lack of males, which is also in turn due to the female's ability to parthenogenize, to lay eggs containing exact clones, as well as their salt resistance and their small size, allowing them to survive on rafts and canoes, meaning they were able to travel across the entire Pacific. Wherever humans went, the geckos did too. These humans took everything they needed to set up a new civilization, livestock and crops, as well as many stowaways, including the gecko. This episode's South Pacific Diaries, Croc Quest, focuses on the crew's quest to find the legendary giant crocodiles in the Solomon Islands. They talk to the locals about these crocodiles, hearing about a 4-meter long tailless croc. Salties in these regions only usually grow to under 3 meters, including their tail. They try to hunt this croc at night when the reptiles are most active, but only catch juveniles. They then go to Leopari Island, where they are told there are giant crocodiles known to hunt people in a holy lake. On their way, they encounter an archaic skull shrine, believed to be guarded by the giant crocs. They are able to find only smaller, 2-meter long crocs in their 3 days camping by the lake. They then had to head to Morovo Lagoon, before checking the mangroves of the nearby Vangunu and Gotoke Islands, but still find nothing. They talked to the locals and discovered that attacks by crocodiles had recently increased, including near the local school. They then head to the capital city of the Solomons Wave for the second segment of this episode, as well as the opening titles and end credits of each episode. It documents their struggles with only having smaller waves in the first few days of filming, as well as having to engineer a large slow-motion camera in a waterproof casing before eventually getting the required footage when the conditions became more ideal. Well, that was the first episode of South Pacific. In my opinion, the episode is a little chaotic, jumping between segments with not much of a theme, though this does get better with the linked Anuta and Rapa Nui segments toward the end. And those definitely being my favourite segments, although I like most of the ones in this episode. My other criticisms of this episode, criticisms of the show as a whole that I have, that will be addressed over the coming videos. And, speaking of then, tune in for the next episode review next week. But, if you enjoyed this one, leave a like, maybe subscribe, check out my Discord server, check out my podcast. I think that's all. Goodbye.